Hi, I'm Dana, and today I want to talk about another TV show because there's a new show that's come out on CBBC. I think it's fairly new, called A Kind of Spark. It's based on a book and it's about a little girl that's autistic. I want to say she's like 11 or 12. I think she's like going into like big school kind of thing, because they make a whole thing at the beginning that it's the same school but a different building, and she's nervous about the change. So the little autistic girl Addie ends up going on this like major adventure essentially after finding a journal and a witch jar, and the town that she lives in is the very nice town of Juniper, so they don't want to acknowledge their past of like witch hunts and murdering people for being different, and she has this extreme sense of justice and is like, no, we're going to talk about the fact that you murdered people like me, thank you. So she goes on this whole little adventure to find out what happened to a girl that was tried as a witch, and along the way we sort of see what's the word? There's a word. When it's like the same thing happening to someone else. She's having a similar sort of like persecution with a girl at school. And her older sister Kitty had a similar thing with a teacher, which we'll be getting into in this video because it's going to be spoiler heavy. I'm going to go in on this. So if you don't want spoilers, you need to go and watch it first. But also, you can watch this first. It's fine. Just be spoiled a little. I'm not going to be going super into the plot because I do want to keep this about autism, but honestly, to start off right there, one of my favourite things is that this isn't a show about autism. Like, the main character and her older sister are both outspokenly very like said to be show autistic traits, like they are autistic, and it is a part of the show, but it's not a show about them being autistic, you know, it's a show about a lot of other things. And they happen to just be autistic people who are the main people in the story. And I love that. That's so nice. We need more of that. I'd love to see more of that. And I really love that this is doing that. And before I get any further, I also want to point out that the person who wrote the book, whose name I can't remember right now, because I literally learned what this was yesterday, watched the whole show. I'm going to buy the book. It's going to be a thing. I'm into this. But she, in an interview that I just watched, said that she was like not okay with it all being made into anything unless the people who were playing the characters were autistic people. And that's been a really amazing thing as well, because I've just watched a bunch of interviews with the actors and it is incredible, like absolutely so like liberating and empowering to see autistic people being interviewed and see autistic people speaking and just being people. You know, like it's the first time in my life that I've watched a professional television interview with a professional television actor who is in things, and I'm like, yo, like she's stimming, she's doing this thing that I do, like she's doing this, like they're autistic. Oh. So that's how this video is gonna go. It's gonna be a lot of jumping around like that. I'm gonna start with the positives and end with the negatives, because there's not many negatives, but there are a few things I want to call out because I'm sorry. So one of the first things that the show touched on that I really appreciated was the experience of being a filler or a prop. So Addie has a situation where a girl is her friend until someone else wants to be that girl's friend, and suddenly she's happy to be a bitch to Addie. I had that so many times in school. People are just your friend until there's a better offer because you're easy enough to be around, but you're not a good social choice. So as soon as they can get away, they do. And I was really happy to see that in a show and see that like it wasn't Addie's fault. It wasn't anything Addie did. It's just like the social standing and this is what's easier for the friend and blah blah blah. And it was nice to see that represented. But also the side of being used as a prop, because one of her sisters, I'm shit with names, I'm sorry, but the middle sister isn't autistic. She's not the middle sister, the older two are twins. She feels like the middle sister and she's not autistic, and she makes a YouTube video being very, here's me making over my autistic sister, and the comments are all really mean and being like, that's not autism, I know what autism looks like, she doesn't look autistic. First of all, very fucking real experience of being autistic on the internet, I liked that. But also just the thing of people finding out that you're autistic and being like, oh my god, let me play on that, let me use that to my advantage, let me manipulate that into something. And like, her sister isn't doing it in like a mean, horrible way. Like, I really like the family dynamic in the show, and her sister wouldn't be mean to her, you know, and I like that was a very like obvious thing. But it is also like the saviour thing of her sister doesn't necessarily even realise that she's being shitty by making a whole thing of my autistic sister, you know? And the girl that played the sister that's neurotypical is also neurodiverse, And I think that was really good because it meant that as much as she was sometimes in the wrong and kind of ableist in the way she treats her sisters, it obviously came from a place of best intention, still like in the format of the show, even without knowing that the actress is neurodiverse, because it just felt very natural in that like she was just trying to navigate having autistic siblings and like being around neurodiverse people as someone who doesn't understand them and doesn't relate to a lot of the things that they do. And I just felt like that was a very like naturally done and accurate thing. And I also really liked that she has like a whole YouTube channel, and there's a point where they're arguing because like she should take the video down because people are being mean about her sister, and she has the whole thing of like, no, but this is how I connect to people and how I get to be seen and how I get to like be someone on my own outside of like the family unit and outside of being part of an autistic family and all that kind of thing. And I thought that was really nicely done, and I feel like it's perhaps going to offer a window to neurotypicals that are watching and offer something that like a lot of other people can relate to, that make it a show that's really for like a diverse group of people and not just autistic people. And that being said, one of the things that I really fucking loved was the way that Addie makes friends with, her name's gone, Addie makes a friend that's just moved to the town, and they have that sort of friendship where like there were some things where I was like, is the friend meant to be neurodiverse in some way? I can't quite tell, and I'm not sure if the actress is or not, but I think that she was meant to be like the neurotypical friend that's just cool and nice and non-judgmental. And I've had a few of those. I've had a few neurotypical friends that just like, they didn't necessarily like romanticize or glamorize my traits in any way, but they also like, they just appreciated me, you know? Like there's a lot of parts of me that are like autistic traits or whatever, and they didn't like latch onto them to be like, oh look, I'm being nice to an autistic person. And they also didn't like treat them like they were anything weird or anything they shouldn't be, and just appreciated me as a quirky, kooky little weird individual, which I think most of us are anyway. But especially as an autistic person, it's really nice to find the people that just appreciate us for us. And it was so nice to see a friendship like that shown in a TV show, and especially one aimed at kids. However, we also have Kitty's friends, and she's that little bit older and that little bit cooler and everything. And she has like a subplot of not telling her friends about being autistic until they eventually see her have a meltdown. I mean, I keep just saying like, I really like that they did this, but I also just really appreciated that they did that, because I think it is literally a reality for a lot of autistic people where we don't know if we're going to be safe to tell people that we're autistic, you know? And I think a lot of the time people take that out of context and like act like we're saying we'll be beaten up if we tell someone we're autistic. But it's like, are we going to be treated differently? Are we going to suddenly be like the friend that people don't want to be around, or the friend that people feel like they have to walk on eggshells around, even though we haven't actually done anything? You know, are we suddenly going to be humiliated for some reason? Are people going to think there's something wrong with us? You know, safety isn't always like a physical matter. It can be like, are they going to humiliate me as well? So there's a few different parts of the show where people have to explain what autism is, be that the girls to other people, and also some scenes of their parents explaining it. And that's where a lot of TV shows and movies and books and everything else have failed for me, where the parents or even the autistic people just explain it horrendously, and it's a very like, I have this superpower. I absolutely hate it. And this show, chef's kiss, does it beautifully. They have very much my opinion and my thoughts, my idea of how to explain what it is to be autistic, which is very just, our brains are a bit different, we process things a bit differently, we might react a bit differently, but we are essentially just the same as everybody else in most ways, okay? You know, it takes on this really great view of like, they don't have something wrong with them, they don't have a disorder, they don't have a disease, they're just autistic. And it's a really great way to be putting it across just in general for like acceptance and understanding. Like, I think that's something that a lot of neurotypical adults need to know about. So I think that it's a really nice and simple and easy way to put it across to kids and like an audience of young people, to be able to like create that awareness and understanding for the future generation. I think that's what it's doing really well and what I really appreciate. And by having two autistic characters, like obviously they could have had more, and like I say, there's some other characters where I'm like, was that supposed to be neurodivergence? But it gives the possibility of having that more diverse view of like, sometimes autistic people can be complete opposite sides of the spectrum, you know, we can be completely opposite in lots of ways. And although like they're sisters, so they're not complete opposites, there are ways in which they differ and ways in which they are not the same. And I think it's good to show that autism isn't always the stereotype we understand it to be. And especially in like episode 1 or 2, I think it was, there's a part where there's like classroom bullying going on, and there's a lot of that, and we're going to get to that. But the language that's thrown around to bully them is very much the kind of thing that I heard and experienced in school without even knowing I was autistic. You know, things like you're weird, you're a freak, you're this, you're that. Like, it was very much the kind of bullying that I experienced in school. And I think it's the kind of bullying that a lot of autistic people experience, whether we know we're autistic at the time or not. So although it was like honestly kind of difficult and a bit traumatic to like watch that and have it brought back up, and it did make me cry a fair few times, it was also, I think, really important and really nice and really like validating in a lot of ways for me to have that specific language that is commonly used for autistic people and about autistic people, whether or not we know we're autistic, to have it like be demonized and be like outspokenly, but it's like, this is a bad thing to say, you shouldn't do this to people, this is the language that autistic people are faced with and it's bad. You know, it's I really like that it's been so just obviously, and like you cannot like fuck around and pretend it's a metaphor and pretend it's this or say it could mean that. Like, here's the exact language that is bad, fuck you. Like, it's very validating, and I really appreciated it, and it was really nice. And I also really loved that so many autistic traits were, I felt like they were put across with such honesty and such like a genuine understanding of the traits. Things like Addie not wanting to be hugged all the time. I feel like it's way too often a thing of like, autistic people don't like to be touched. And it's like, yeah, I hate being touched by strangers or unexpectedly. In certain situations, I could really do with a hug, okay? And a lot of the times, it's just treated like autistic people don't want that. And I really like there were other examples as well, but that one especially stuck with me because I was like, oh, thank God you're actually putting this across in a way of like a genuine understanding and not having just Googled some stuff and like, you know? But the thing that really shocked me and surprised me, like in a really pleasant way, was the internal traits that are represented. Like, it was, I'm starting to tear up. It was the internal traits of the two main girls. The things like when Kitty and the sister go to a vintage store, her sister's like kind of grossed out. He's like, oh my God, these clothes are old and dirty. And Kitty's like, no, but think of all the stories. Think of the places that people wore these things. And like when Addie's walking through the woods and she's just like looking up at the trees and at the floor and like looking at things and really taking in the beauty. And it's this like internal wonderment that I feel is so part of being autistic. And like, it's something that I've spoken about to a lot of people, like trying to put these feelings across, and people just don't seem to get it. And then I've like started to bring it up to other autistic people and they've gotten it. And I really loved seeing it. You know, it's this internal thing of like, there's so much to the world. And when you walk into a store full of vintage clothing, like, think of the situations these have been worn in. When I buy a beautiful party dress, some bitch in the 80s probably wore that to a party. What happened there? Did she have her first kiss? Did she fight someone? Did she break up with someone? Like, there's all these tales and stories, and the whole world is like filled with like things to find out all the time. And neurotypical people often don't seem to see it. And I feel like autistic people do. And to be able to see that in another autistic character was incredible. I loved it. I really, really fucking adored it. And also the way that they put forth like the special interest aspect, because like Addie gets hyperfixated on this whole witchcraft thing, like the witch trials and getting a memorial for them. And obviously it is like a massive part of her sense of justice as an autistic person, being like, these people were persecuted and murdered just for being different, just for being probably like me. You know, it's the sense of justice, but she also does hyperfixate and it becomes a huge special interest for her. And they talk also about Kitty's special interest in a specific battle, you know, and we're really showing how like these are things that calm and comfort them, and they're things that like they really fixate on it and have a deep need for more knowledge about. And Addie's also like really obsessed with sharks, which is like a typical autism special interest that I don't feel like is stereotypical, you know? It's the type of interest that I think a lot of us can see ourselves in. Like, I never had a shark phase, but I had my dinosaur phase, and I think sharks they're not literally dinosaurs, but you know what I mean on that, right? I hope. However, I do want to use that as a segue to the things I thought were negative. Because as much as I enjoyed them having special interest being thrown in there, it was also like almost exclusively used as like a comfort thing / hyperfixation, and there weren't really any like continued special interests that I picked up on. And one of the things that I like actually really quite strongly disliked was that it was showing us, though, especially for Kitty, special interests were only something that came up when something like traumatic or bad had happened, or when it was like to detriment to themselves, when for me my special interests are like a major source of joy and comfort and happiness and good things, and I'd have liked to see that a bit more represented. But the thing that really bugged me is that there's a point where Kitty has burnout, and I was really excited that they mentioned autistic burnout. I was like, oh shit, here we go. And I don't want to shit on it, because overall I really enjoyed the show. I think it's a great like little overview of what it is to be autistic without it being about autism, you know? But Kitty's burnout hits and she literally just collapses at the bottom of the stairs and like cannot move and is just like asleep, and her sister's like, oh, it's just autism burnout again, huh? And she just goes to bed for a bit and then like fixates on the battle thing for like 2 minutes. And then there was a whole thing at the battle that she got really fixated on about this jump. So they go and do the jump and then she's just fine. And I was like, you know, I don't want to call out any, you know, I don't want to call that out as like incorrect in any way, because I'm just one autistic person. There's every chance that other autistic people's burnout has represented like that and has felt like that. I've never experienced burnout in the way of like you just collapse and you're just burnt out for a day or two and then you're good, you know? Burnout for me is a very prolonged thing, and the way that Kitty describes it, to be fair, is that she's been masking for too long and trying to keep it all going for too long. But I'd have liked to see a bit more of an actual representation of that outside of like her just collapsing, you know? Like she should have been getting more and more tired, and then maybe one day she can't get out of bed. It wasn't the worst done thing I've ever seen, but there were ways that they could have done it better. But the thing that I really disliked was that during scenes when characters are having meltdowns, they did the thing of either the edges of their vision or everything in their vision going blurry. And again, I don't want to shit on it, because maybe that does happen to people. I'm but one autistic person. But for me, when I'm in a place of like overwhelm and everything's too much and I'm about to go into a shutdown or a meltdown or just generally have a bad time, everything's like sharper for me and brighter, and the like literally like saturation and contrast and everything is like turned way up. Like everything's too much to look at. It's not blurry. It looked like they were meant to be on drugs. Okay, that's like like that's how the world looks when you're like on MD or something. Like that's not a meltdown. Fucking hell. No, I didn't love that. But again, on the other side of it, there are very few negatives to this show, because as much as I'm like, it doesn't look like that, that's not it. The feelings they're depicting through like when the characters have a meltdown, and the way in which they've explained meltdowns are not tantrums, meltdowns aren't intentional, meltdowns aren't dangerous, you know, all of that stuff is really good, and I really like that. So the fact that it's just a funky camera angle, camera trick to get that across to the audience isn't the worst thing in the world. But I also think that neurotypicals are going to watch things like that and assume that's what it is to be autistic, so they're going to get like right in the centre of your vision and stuff, and it's like, no, just go away. Sorry, I just got really stressed with the memories of my own meltdowns when people have done that. But yeah, it's not the worst thing in the world, and arguably it's all stuff that like that might be how some autistic people experience it. It's just not how I do. And we are going back to positives, I'm afraid. I thought I'd written down more negatives than I actually had. Now, the big one that I want to get into is there is the overarching theme of both girls having the issue of one of the teachers in school. I fucking adore that this was a plot point, because every single school that I went to, and I went to quite a few different schools, most teachers would be like, Dana's a pleasure to have in class, Dana keeps her head down, Dana's quiet, Dana just does her work, Dana's gets a little chatty or overexcited every now and again, but overall Dana's a pleasure to have in class. And then there would always be that one teacher that would be like, Dana is evil, Dana is the worst student I've ever taught, you're conniving, you're this, you're that, you're this, you're that. Like, I always had that one teacher that just fucking hated me. And the teacher that they have in this that just like goes out after both girls for like no fucking reason, is exactly the same as every teacher I ever had that was like that. It was so fucking difficult to watch, but I had so many of these moments while watching it where I was like, oh my god, it's not just me. I was not the fucking issue. You know, like, there's so much that I've carried on myself. Like, I'm sorry this has become a therapy video, but, like, as an autistic person who, like, clearly this is not just me that went through this, I carried so much shit on my back for, like, what did I do to these teachers, especially the one that I had, like, the last, because I finished high school, the last 4 years of high school, there was one teacher that just went after me. And we had, like, screaming matches where it's like, why would you behave like this to a child? Like, woman was in her 30s and I was 15, you know? And even as, like, a 26-year-old now, I just would not bother with a child like that. I'd just be like, you calm down and come back in a bit. Like, fuck. But this one would, like, scream at me in the exact same way that the teacher does in the show. And conniving. Oh, you think you're so much better than everyone else. You think you're special. Like, the exact language that was used, I was like, oh shit, bitch. Like, I think that anyone who grew up, like, diagnosed or undiagnosed, being treated as a girl in the UK, this will be your experience. Like, I really believe that. I really, like, that was what I fucking lived through. This was my time in school. Like, that's what it was like. It's so fucking bizarre to me that was a worldly and, like, widespread enough experience that there's been a book and a TV show that's got the same fucking teacher using the same things that they said about me. And getting back to the show, I fucking love that this bitch has to leave town. She don't have a job and she's got to fuck off out of Juniper. I love that, because how often do the bad guys, especially in situations like this where they're going against the kid, how often do they actually get any sort of comeuppance? And this is getting kind of long, but I'm sorry, it's gonna be longer, because I want to talk about the fact that the town of Juniper is one of these, like, very close-knit little village type of situations, and the whole thing is that, like, it's a nice place, so we don't talk about horrible things like murdering witches and the like. We talk about nice things in the nice town of Juniper, and you don't need to come along and disrupt the peace of things with your little weirdness, you know? And it feels like such a little, like, allegory for society and how the autistic people come in and we ruin the, like, status quo. Like, that's definitely a whole thing. But I do want to start actually wrapping this up now. So my final thing that I want to say is that the little, like, wrap-up speech that Addie does, where she, like, calls everyone to the town square and they finally vote, and I'm not going to tell you because that would be spoilers, but she calls everyone to the town square and has a little speech of, like, I'm Addie and I'm autistic and that's okay. And it's a lovely little speech, don't get me wrong, but the bit I want to comment on is that there's a point where she's like, oh, well, Mr. such and such does this weird thing, and Mrs. such and such over there does this weird thing, and Mr. so-and-so does this weird thing. And I had this absolute brick shit moment of fear where I was like, oh my god, really, like 5 minutes away from finishing the last episode, this is where they're gonna pull out, like, oh, everybody's a little bit autistic after all. And they didn't. She pulled it out as, like, we're all people, and the fact that I'm autistic doesn't mean that you can't relate to me or that I'm not a normal person like you. It just means I'm a normal autistic person. We're all, like, we're all the same, but we're not all autistic, you know? Like, it was beautifully done. It was perfect. I'm so glad they didn't do we're all a bit autistic, and instead they related it to, like, we can all relate to each other as humans whether we're autistic or not, you know? I felt that it was a beautiful way to round up the show. I think it's a really fucking great message to be sending to people. The overall messages of, like, understanding and accepting autism that are in this show are astoundingly good. Even, like, watching it as an adult, never mind as a child. You know, for autistic kids, I think that this is going to be an absolute wealth of relatability and validation, and just a general message of, like, you're okay and you can do what you need to, and you can do, like, everything that everyone else can fucking do, and you can be autistic and be normal. Like, there's nothing abnormal or wrong about being autistic, and I feel like the show gets it really, really well across for that. And as an autistic person that had an awful time in school, it was slightly traumatic to see so many of the things I went through, like, literally replicated on screen, but also very healing and validating, and a real, like, yo, like, I was not in the wrong for existing as an 8-year-old, you know? There's definitely more I could say about this, so honestly, there might be a part 2. I might do a rewatch and do a more, like, well laid out thoughts on things. I think this is going to be a bit of a special interest for me. I think this is going to be a bit of a thing. I really fucking enjoyed it. I really, like, I know it's a kids show, but I think if anything, that might be what drew me in all the more. It's got a proper little like shoebox zoo fucking oh, what was the one I watched? Sparkle and Mysteries, the one where everyone's parent, like all the adults in the world went missing. Like it's got that proper like classic CBBC like Worst Witch, Sparkle Mysteries, fucking shoebox zoo kind of vibe. Yeah, I would have loved this shit as a kid. I love this shit now. I love it. Okay. Like it's, oh, I wanted to have a whole little bit about how I don't love that they are diagnosing women that were murdered for being witches as autistic, but that's definitely for another video. If you've watched this show, please leave your comments below. If you haven't watched this show, let me know what you think from what I've told you and go watch it. Just general comments. I'd like it if you commented. Linked down below will be links to my TikTok and Spotify. I'm not linking you to my Spotify, what the shit. The links to my TikTok, Instagram and Twitter, along with my Patreon and Ko-fi. Over here on YouTube, you can subscribe. I love it when people subscribe. You can also become a YouTube member if you'd like to. But that's all I've got. I post every Sunday and Thursday, so please do come back for more content. And for now, whoever you are and wherever you are, I hope you're having a lovely morning, evening, day, afternoon, week, month, year. And I will see you again in a couple of days.